Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much again for joining us this evening for our candidate forum for the San Diego North Business Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to welcome former Congressman Darrell Issa and Ammar Campa-Najjar to this evening's dialogue. I'll provide a little introduction, and then if we could, we'll have just a brief introductory comments by both of you. We'll do about 30 minutes of questions, followed by some questions from the audience, and then we'll allow time to wrap up. It was really a dialogue, not intended to be a formal debate or anything, so please keep that in mind. With that, I'd like to introduce Ammar Campa-Najjar. He was born in the East County and raised by his working class Christian mother. He is a small business owner and the former executive director of public affairs for the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. In this role, he worked across the aisle with members of Congress and President Trump to ensure American small businesses were at the forefront of our nation's economic agenda. Next, we'd like to welcome former Congressman Darrell Issa. Prior to his election to Congress, Issa was a technology industry leader and CEO. He founded Vista, California-based Directed Electronics, Inc., the industry-leading manufacturer of automobile security and convenience products. Issa has served as the chairman of the Consumer Electronics Association, the board of governors of the Electronic Industry Association, and is director of the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation and the Greater San Diego County Chamber of Commerce. With that, we'd like to welcome you both. Ammar, if we could start with you with some brief introductions, please.
Sure. Thanks, Joe, for having me, and thank you to SDG&E and the North San Diego Business Chamber of Commerce for having us. I feel like I have a little bit of a home court advantage. My stepdad, Maurice Luque, was the comms director for SDG&E many moons ago. And he gave me some pointers and he says hello. I was born and raised in East County. I feel like Ice is probably tired of hearing this because we've been saying this over and over and we've been telling our stories, but I'll keep it quick. I was born and raised in East County, raised by a single working class mom, like you said. I was brought up with my family here in San Diego, had a great public education, got to live beyond my zip code, got to work at the White House. Nothing too, shabby. I worked in the correspondence office, reading the 10 letters a day the president would read. Then I went to go work at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing 4 million Hispanic-owned businesses that contributed over $1 trillion a year to the economy. I became the executive director of public affairs and communications, and got to work and see how the commerce side of the economy works, and really be able to see how working across the aisle you get a lot more done than just having one party, over the other. And then I got to work at the U.S. Department of Labor as the public affairs officer, overseeing the Employment and Training Administration. So I got to work on the labor side of the economy. And then I started a small business. It was pretty successful in the first year, but then I started to move towards my campaign and I really put it on the back burner, but I was able to make a good living for myself. And I'm really proud of what I've been able to accomplish. But for the past 4 years, I've been campaigning, working really hard, trying to represent this district. And in 2018, nearly 50% of the district voted for me, 48.3%, 1.7% more, and you would have had a congressman now. And now I'm coming back, I'm fighting back, I'm not turning away, and the race is looking pretty close, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to put country over party, and that this conversation will generate more light than heat. And I'm looking forward to having the conversations about what we can do together to elevate small businesses, reduce tax cuts and tax burdens. When I was at the Obama administration, we elevated the SBA to a full cabinet level position and really folded a lot of different agencies into the SBA. So I hope when I'm in Congress, I can continue to do that work to advocate for small businesses, working people, and find out the things that we agree on. We won't always agree on everything. That's not how democracy works, but hopefully we can come together and get things done together. I hope we could have a new generation of leadership to look at old problems in a new way. And that's what I hope to accomplish in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman?
No, my opponent is right. I am getting a little tired of hearing it. About 3 years before my opponent was born, I moved to the 50th Congressional District and built a business from a few $100,000 to a market leader of over $100 million, employing hundreds of employees here in the North County, here in the 50th Congressional District. When I came to San Marcos in 1985, what I really had was a dream, a 67 Karmann Ghia, and a good start. I had been here in California in the United States Army for 4 years, had served here as a lieutenant and as a captain, went back and started the business in the place I was born, which was Cleveland, Ohio. but my love for California brought me back here, and this is where I built my business and raised my family, and where I have 2 granddaughters, and where I intend to continue to be well invested. As you said in the introduction, I was extremely involved in the nonprofit world, both on the industry side, but also with the chamber and the EDC, where I devoted a considerable amount of time helping business in addition to my own business. I left that, sold, liquidated the business, my interest in the business, more than 20 years ago, so I could focus on government service full time. And that's what I've been doing. I've been a successful member of Congress, rising to the rank of chairman, passing many dozens of pieces of legislation. In spite of what President Obama said, he signed about 40 pieces of legislation I sent his way, including important pieces like the Data Act and federal IT reform. These are bipartisan pieces of legislation. I know how to get legislation passed on a bipartisan basis. In this campaign, my 18 years of credentials are being constantly criticized because of a statement here or a statement there, when in fact, all the groups who rate me, whether it's the National Right to Life, the NRA, the Border Patrol, ICE, any of the others, have found me to be a consistent conservative. I fit this district. I've built my business and my life in this district. I represented about a third of this district for longer than my predecessor, Duncan Hunter, represented it. I know the Native American tribes throughout the area. I've worked on federal legislation, including helping put land in trust, but I've also worked on the healthcare issues, whether it was for our soldiers, sailors, and Marines, whether it was for our veterans, or even Indian health. So there's a lot of areas I've worked in, successfully been able to be a big part of settling a number of old issues, water issues, something important to all of us in California. I left to join the Trump administration. It was a good decision, but unfortunately, politics got in the way and I was filibustered. But I'm one of over 300 nominees of the president that were filibustered. As I think the record is very clear and very well known, you don't get put up for a position, independent agency head, unless you've already passed the background check and passed an FBI check. But I think it's important, and I don't want to be always on the defense, but I think it's important that my young opponent who's been saying something different understand you don't get a security clearance as an Army officer and maintain that security clearance if you've had some sort of a disqualifying youth. So when allegations are made every day in this campaign that somehow events in 1972 or in the late 70s, early 80s, that any of those events disqualified me, nothing could be further from the truth. I continued to be an Army officer maintaining my security clearance, went on to be a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, where I was privileged to see the most classified information throughout the years as the war on terror began and moved on. I make no bones about it. As a conservative, the other district that I represented became very difficult, but I stood my ground. I continued to make all of the same conservative votes throughout that period, while at the same time being innovative in trying to find common ground with the other party. Even in my last term, I was still working with Scott Peters on immigration reform. He was my co-sponsor of it. We got it out of committee unanimously. If I go back, I intend to continue in many of those areas with the people who are willing to work across the aisle to get legislation passed that we can't agree on. We don't always agree on everything. One thing that 18 years of successful work in Congress tells you is, one, you keep your nose clean. I've never had an ethics violation, and notwithstanding the kinds of things that go on during campaigns, I've had a spotless record. That's a record in which I not only didn't take any campaign funds personally, but I also gave away more than my pay every year to charity. And that brings the last point, is that I have more than 20 years of working with local groups, with local nonprofits, empowering them to be part of the constant struggle against homelessness and drug addiction. That and other areas are many of my local activities, which continue to this day. I look forward to the debate, but I also look forward, I think, to using this as an opportunity to make it clear that I'm a consistent conservative and that what you might hear on television or radio simply isn't true. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get into some of the issues here and start broadly and kind of work our way into them a little bit as much as time will allow. But Ammar, what do you think is the biggest challenge the 50th District will face over the next 10 years, and how do you propose to resolve that?
Great question, and I hope you won't let us filibuster again. That's something that 18 years of experience in Congress, I guess, becomes a habit. But you know, I think there's a whole host of issues. I think the wildfires will continue to get worse. We had the hottest days on record in East County a couple of weeks ago with the Valley Fire, where I had to evacuate Hamul and then come back a week later. So it's a real issue that will continue to haunt us, and we need to allocate federal resources and bring it in earlier, and make sure that we have the federal involvement, the military involvement, and local involvement all synced in earlier than we've had in the past. But I think the biggest issue that we're facing also is, as a state, we're the richest and poorest state in the union. And that goes into housing and everything else. But our county and our district, East County, is a big example of that disparity. And we need to fix that and make sure that we reward work, not just wealth. Make sure that we give people rungs to the middle class. That's why at the Department of Labor, I was really proud to work on apprenticeship to help people retrain and retool, help corporations find that trained worker because of the skills gap that we have. So I think the future, the biggest challenge we're going to have is making sure people have good paying jobs. They don't have to go into San Diego proper to get a good paying job or commute an hour away like they are now. But make sure that we can create good paying jobs, empower small businesses who are the job creators in this country to hire more people and be able to create economic mobility throughout our own district instead of having us have to commute to work and then live somewhere else.
Thank you. Mr. Issa.
Are we running a clock? Because I really would like to know. I thought I used about the same amount of time as my opponent there. How long do you want for these answers?
If you can keep them concise, that would be great. And the more questions we can get through, just a couple minutes each, and I'll try to balance it out as we go through. Unfortunately, as you know, these go very quickly. So.
Yeah,
absolutely. Look, the most important challenge to East County is, in fact, the state of California. The bad policies coming out of Sacramento continue to be job killers. Last year, 1 million people voted by leaving this state. We're likely to lose a congressional seat in redistricting because, in fact, for the first time, California has not grown faster than the rest of the country. Having said that, you know, the job you can do as a federal worker is to make sure that you do everything you can to make job opportunities as good as they can, helping get rid of federal legislation, making sure that you bring those items to bear. One of the areas that for North County and East County, and this district is 2/3 North County, 1/3 East County. This, in fact, one of our number one issues is sandbag. As Ammar mentioned, rightfully so, a lot of people have to come from Temecula, North County, or East County into other areas to seek work. Those roads are blocked. Sandag and the other organizations are very downtown oriented. They spend a lot of time pushing us into mass transit systems that don't work. Well, in fact, what we need to do is to make sure that federal funds are appropriately used to help unclog some of the major thoroughfares that Ammar sees when he comes in out of Hamul. I see when I come down the 15 out of North County.
Thank you. Being a business chamber, I want to make sure to get to some topics that are extremely important to our membership currently, especially now amid the pandemic and the struggle the businesses are going through throughout this coronavirus pandemic, and really would love to hear more from you on what you think can be done federally to help businesses when we do emerge from the pandemic. And Mr. Issa, maybe you can start.
Happily. You know, one of the things that I think we should all be proud of is that when this first started on a bipartisan basis, Congress acted and the president provided more money than has ever been thrown at any non-military event, and actually more money than was ever thrown at any war in 2-year period. So the good news is the federal government came in with money. The bad news is that much of that money was not spent where I think it should be. keeping businesses open should have been the primary goal. Any new federal aid needs to really help and make sure that the cost of recovering from the pandemic and in fact making sure that you can work safely, that should be a big part of any new stimulus package or any new support package. The federal government can play a role in that with consistent education and with programs that provide that. As you know, the first round was intended basically to soften the blow of sending people home for a few weeks. We're now 6 months into this. It's very clear that, and this is where my opponent and I agree, we've got to get back to work. We've got to get safely back to work, and the federal government needs to do everything it can. But once again, Sacramento certainly is a problem. Our county supervisors have been asking for permission to safely go back to work, and they're not getting it. One of the oddities is that you can reopen, or you never closed, a liquor store or a marijuana clinic, but many of our best businesses were shuttered and were unable to reopen. And when they did reopen, they were often told to close again. We've got to stop that, and that's going to be a priority.
Thank you. Mr. Campa-Najjar?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that we once agree on something else as well. The idea of shutting down, opening phases, stages, purple, red, it was the inconsistency of guidance given from state has really hurt businesses who, have told me, we would have been better off if you just told us, just stick to this game plan. You're doing takeout and delivery for a bit. Instead of telling them you're going to reopen, then they don't. And then the capital, the labor, the time that goes into that ends up being a net negative for them. So that's number one. Number two, PPP and PPE to open up safely, right? That's really important. I do agree that the first, stimulus package was, good. It was quick. I would have wanted to see some improvements on it in terms of who was able to get it, small businesses. One point of distinction between me and my opponent is, I think PPP is still relevant now, even if we're reopening. I've talked to an owner of a local IHOP who said, I'm still trying to figure out how to get above water. So that PPP, that Paycheck Protection Program, would be helpful for me. And I do need that to get back on my feet. And that's a very small, maybe distinction without a difference that I have with my opponent. And then also, the pandemic has highlighted already existing problems that we have on the federal level with small businesses. We need to cut regulation. We need to cut taxes for small businesses because they create 2/3 of all new jobs in this country. And then the federal government has a self-imposed quota it tries to reach. 23% of all federal contracts are supposed to go to small businesses. And we rarely meet that mark on a consistent basis. That quota should be up to 30%, especially with the fact that they create 2/3 of all new jobs. So that's one thing I would do, and make sure that we move heaven and earth to make sure that small businesses are able to work. And the one thing that I would have done differently with the stimulus is allocate more funding to PPP, because for every person that you give a PPP check to, they have an obligation to keep their workers employed. And that would have been one less dollar. For every dollar you spend on PPP is one less dollar in unemployment. And it would have gone further to save the business and save the worker, all with the same dollar. So I would have allocated a little bit more unemployment funding towards PPP for small businesses to keep workers going.
Thank you. Along those lines, both parties have been unable to reach an agreement on a second coronavirus stimulus deal. What is your position on a second stimulus package? Is it needed, and what should it include? Mr. Issa?
Clearly, this is one of those things where if you ask for too much and you throw in too much pork, the other side balks. That goes both directions, both parties. Right now, the fact that neither party seems to be willing to compromise is a tragedy. But let's get into the details. Nancy Pelosi has pushed for $3 trillion and then said, well, I might compromise at $2 trillion, but still included in that were bailout for state pensions and other things that certainly might be interesting to look into, but they're not related to the pandemic. There's no question at all, a pandemic first, pandemic only, where every single dollar can be traced to exactly how it's going to mitigate the pandemic, whether that's $500 billion or $250 billion or $1 trillion. I think there's no question at all that should be the priority. The one thing that I found over the years is when you can't agree on an omnibus, Republicans and Democrats coming together, forming small groups, and coming up with mini programs and daring both parties to not bring to the floor a small solution would certainly be part of it. There are people in both parties willing to do that historically. I'm sorry I haven't seen them emerge in this case. If I'm back there, I'm going to be doing that. You know, my opponent mentioned a couple of things, but one of them that I think is pretty important is that small business getting access to dollars. I have a record of actually breaking up federal contracts, pushing back on the Bush administration and others over the years to make sure when they do a large contract, it gets broken up. One example would be when we were rebuilding Camp Pendleton and the other military bases, and they came out with a contract only one company could qualify for. With Duncan Hunter Sr. and myself, I pushed back. We made them break that up so that as many as 11 or 12 companies could qualify. We got a better deal, and we got real employment here for buildings being built on the West Coast.
Thank you. Mr. Campa-Najjar, you know, is a second stimulus required, and what should be included if so?
It absolutely does, and I'm not taking my cues from party leadership. It's the people in my district who are saying we're still hurting. We can't pretend like this isn't over. I'm sure your businesses are also hurting, right? It's a reality that we're facing on the ground. It's not an abstraction. And I do think we need it. It's really unfortunate that the president said he won't do it until after the election. I hope he'll change his mind on that. Maybe that's just a political kind of pressure he's doing. He's good at doing that. So hopefully we get an agreement. That's how the sausage is made sometimes. But what I would do, the one thing I want to make sure that we get right is, you know, I agree with, Scott Peters, who endorsed me along with the San Diego Congressional Delegation. He had this idea of introducing automatic triggers so that small business relief is not folded into a larger stimulus package, that it's a constant flow of funding that goes to small businesses immediately when they need it, because it's a good return on investment. You keep small businesses going, you'll keep the economy going. So I agree with that pro-business approach that Congressman Scott Peters and so-called new Dems, the moderate Democrats that support that, along with the Blue Dog Democrats, very far off from what socialists are saying, right? Which is pay for everything. But that's something that I would definitely try to focus on, is those automatic triggers for small businesses only, to make sure that they're not caught up in this partisan wish list and pet project game that everyone's trying to smuggle in their own thing. That I agree with the former congressman, let's not get carried away here, is also proposing. We might not agree on the specifics, but I think that the net result here is, on this issue, you're going to get the same kind of approach from either one of us. The only difference is the House is still going to be controlled by Democrats, which I think everyone here knows. You need 21 seats to flip, and one of them is the 49th. So at least I'll be a local congressman who's in the majority, who can actually deliver for our county, along with Scott Peters, Susan Davis, Juan Vargas, and whoever wins the 53rd, yeah.
Thank you. Well, just alluded to it, but I think, San Diegans they continue to be deeply pessimistic about the chances that partisan cooperation will improve in Congress. What, if anything, do you think can be done to change this and get both parties to work effectively? Mr. Issa?
I have a record of passing dozens of pieces of legislation. Every one of them was bipartisan. I don't have a record of a straight party line. During the time in which we were in divided government, which was most of the time that I served in Congress, whether I was in the majority or minority, I was able to produce bipartisan legislation and get it signed by the president. That goes on. One of the interesting things is I can tick off under both parties things that were passed on a partisan only basis, and they're almost unheard of. The Obamacare would be a good example where it was purely partisan. And it's one of the reasons that even today, the two sides can't come to an agreement on fixing those serious flaws in Obamacare. But in this case, I'm going to be brief. My record is I've gotten that legislation passed time and time again. I put out legislation boldly, asking the other side to join me. Most of the time they did. And I'll just go back to something as interesting as the Data Act, where Vice President Biden was speaking well of it. Well, I was working with Mark Warner in the Senate to make it law. And it creates transparency. It creates an ability for the government to do a better job finding out where money was spent. Most importantly, I think for small businesses, it allows us to drill all the way down to find out if a general contractor or a large contractor, who they're actually using as subs. That allows us to really just find out, and Ammar alluded to, mandates to have small businesses get contracts are important for smaller contracts, but just as important, you want to make sure that if there's a large contract, there's an inclusion of small businesses, and you don't simply have a large company picking one or two other big subs and the small businessman gets left out.
Mr. Campa-Najjar.
Yeah, I mean, look, when in 2017, you go back to an article on The Hill and a couple others, people asked me, why am I running? And I said, I'm running in 2017 because I want to prove that a Democrat could work with President Donald Trump. I made that bold statement and a couple liberals shrugged, like they didn't like that. But that's what you got to do. You got to work with the other side to get things done. There's things that we agree on, apprenticeship jobs being one of them. I wrote the president a memo when I left the Department of Labor. I said, here's a program that sounds like your TV show. Put your name on it and make it great again. Let's do it for small business and for the working people. Let's do that $2 trillion investment in infrastructure and invest in rural broadband. The Democrats and Trump almost got done, right? Let's actually reduce the cost of prescription drugs. These are things that we can do. And I frankly think that the biggest problem with gridlock is that you have, and this is not a dig against my opponent, it's more of Mitch McConnell, 40 years in Congress, Nancy Pelosi there for 40 years. You have career politicians who are there who will get comfortable and they like the partisan gridlock because it's good politics for them, but it's not good policy. So I support term limits. I think you should be in there for a couple years, do your time and move on. I think my opponent supported that in 2018. He mentioned that, and that's a point of agreement that we have. But I think you get in, you get out. Our founders never envisioned having career politicians there for decades upon decades. You get fresh blood, people willing to work together. They don't get into their silos. And I think that's really important. So I think that's how you're going to break the gridlock. And a really good example of that, and I love this example, Ted Cruz and AOC worked together. Surprising, you would never think that Ted Cruz and AOC would ever work together on anything, but they worked together on making access to birth control accessible, lobbying reform, government reform, the very things I'm talking about. So there is small beacons of hope on people on the extremes who are coming together. The problem is Mitch McConnell won't let a lot of these things come to a vote. So we do have to make sure that we have term limits so these career politicians don't keep the status quo, because they're benefiting from the status quo. If you want to see change happen, you have to elect different types of leaders.
Thank you. And this question will go back to you. You alluded to infrastructure, and as you know, in the 50th, in North County, Inland, East County communities, transportation and infrastructure is a major subject, a very controversial one. How do you propose, if elected to Congress, to address some of the infrastructure needs of the region?
I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't do it with a gas tax that is set for roads, and then they end up trying to build a bullet train from nowhere to nowhere. The way we do it is California pays more federal taxes than any other state in the union. We're literally subsidizing Kentucky and other smaller states. We need to get our federal tax dollars back to California. Every year we get less from DC than we put into it. Get our federal resources back into the community. I'll work with Scott Peters and everybody else who's in the county Congressional District, county delegation that have endorsed me to make that happen. And that's what we need to do. And it's a big issue. It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. When we have fires in my district, North County and East County and Temecula, what happens is first responders are trying to rush to the fire. People in the community are trying to leave. As you know, SDG&E knows very well about the stuff and is on the front lines trying to help mitigate this stuff. But you have people trying to get in, people trying to get out, and these roads end up looking like parking lots. And it becomes a danger. So we need to make sure to invest in our infrastructure. And while we're at it, you know, invest in rural broadband so that every single young person or business owner has access to good internet, so that they're not being hamstrung because they don't have access to the World Wide Web, including businesses in my district. I mean, this is the only time we've had a forum, me and Issa, where my Wi-Fi's worked so far. So God willing, it stays that way. But every time I've had to get bumped off because here in East County, it's not the best. So, you know, investing in rural broadband infrastructure and working with President Trump, if he's elected, on that $2 trillion investment to put our, you know, infrastructure back on the 21st century, and maybe even mobilize the military to do that. You know, the last time we made a big investment in infrastructure, it was Eisenhower deploying the Department of Defense funding and resources to create the interstate highway because of the national security needs of infrastructure. I believe the fires and these extreme weather crises are creating another national security threat for us that requires a whole of government approach, from the federal government all the way to the local municipalities and city government here in San Diego.
Mr. Issa, how would you address infrastructure needs in the 50th?
Well, you know, I just finished a blue ribbon panel that has a national tone, but it also has a very important tone in this district. Former General Wesley Clark and I headed up one on grid security, One of the things we know here in California is because of California's version of the Green New Deal and the way we've been importing electricity, we find ourselves with the lights going out. We're not able to maintain reliable electricity. Ammar, rightfully so, said that we've got to work on rural broadband. But you know what? The internet doesn't work at all without electricity. And one of the most important areas of infrastructure that needs to occur when we're working from home, when we're building businesses that don't work where others have in the past, they're not concentrated in downtown, is we have to have a whole new national reliable grid. That means we have to have backup power 24/7. Of course, it's good to use renewables whenever possible, but it's also good to make sure instead of mandating that we hit 100% renewable by a certain date, how about we have 100%, the lights never go out. This has been a problem in California on a couple of occasions. It's a problem again, and it's going to keep being a problem unless we make those investments. The national government can take a big role in it. It is a major part of infrastructure, and if you're going to roll out rural broadband, one of the ways you're going to do it is making sure that electricity goes to every home, and along with it can go a much faster internet.
You both brought up an important subject, and that is wildfires. Currently, we have the largest wildfire ever in the state of California history. It's certainly driven the conversation around climate change and the environment. What can you do to help better protect California from devastating wildfires in the future, Congressman?
You know, I joined a bipartisan caucus with Scott Peters, and it existed as a, if you will, a climate change alternative, one that said, what are the solutions? And that solutions caucus began, and I hope during my 2 years I've been gone, continued to work across the aisle on the things we can agree on. I'll give you just one example. We're prematurely shutting down nuclear, which is, of course, zero emissions. When you shut these down, you get all the waste and you lose 30 years worth of electricity without a solution even pending for where the waste goes. That's a problem for San Onofre, for Diablo Canyon, that are already shut down. But around the country, there is no plan to get 24/7 baseline power with zero emissions, and that has to be worked on. One of the things just north of the 50th Congressional District that's been sitting for a very long time because the PUC is unwilling to think outside the box is pump storage. The reality is the best way to turn renewable energy into 24-hour energy is to store water on our hillsides and let it come down during the evening and the night when we don't have solar or wind. The fact is that if we had twice as much solar today, we'd still have to throw it away during the day and be without it at night when we need it. Batteries aren't going to get us there. Just for example, if we were to store enough to take care of our needs for solar being used during the evening hours, we'd need at least the equivalent of 500 of Elon Musk factories working for more than a year to provide just 1 day worth of storage. The fact is, we need to be more innovative. We need to have large storage capability, or we need to keep other systems on board. And so when the climate solutions people start talking, we talk in those terms, finding solutions that work, working with the public utilities and others on what it takes. But you did start off mentioning wildfires. Obviously, one of the most expensive but needed areas is that we need to have more of our infrastructure in California buried or essentially free from the risk of fire. It's expensive, but we've got to be willing to do it at least in those high fire areas. And in East County and in North County, you still see a lot of power poles because we don't enjoy what downtown San Diego enjoys, which is essentially the power lines buried.
Mr. Campa-Najjar.
Yeah, I think one of the things we could do to mitigate the risk of wildfires, we won't be able to reduce it completely, but SDG&E is working on this notion of trying to replace all the wooden posts for the utility poles into steel, which I think will have a significant impact on fires that are triggered by those kinds of events. So kudos to that. I'd like to see it happen quicker. I don't know if we can get federal funding to make that happen, but I'm going to hold you guys to that. It's important. And I know you guys are committed to doing that. And also, you know, we should have an after action report. That's something my stepdad told me about. I'm like, what's that? He's like, well, let me sit you down, son, and tell you what it's about. But every time there's a fire or even a major catastrophe, there's an after action report to see what we did well, what we could do better, and what we completely missed the mark on. I'd want to do that with the Valley Fire to see what we could do better. I think deploying resources earlier from the federal level, the military, et cetera, could have stopped the swelling in the fire to reduce it from where it was now to 17,000 acres and 30 homes lost and countless livestock. And that's not on anybody specifically, but we could learn how to do that better and catch this earlier. Like any emergency, whether it's terrorism, a fire, a pandemic, or cancer, the early response is what stops things from metastasizing. And that could have saved lives and livelihoods. In the case of our fire, livelihoods. No lives were lost, thankfully. So that's one thing I would do. In terms of climate change, you know, I would ask you to Google ClimateGate. It's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, but I think my opponent questioned the numbers on climate change. I don't really know all of it, so I won't bring it up, but look up ClimateGate. I'm not sure what it's about. Sounds like conspiracy theory to me, but here's what I think we should do is work across the aisle and invest in renewable energy, not just generation, but storage, because California is getting ahead of itself. We're trying to have this renewable energy revolution, but we don't have the proper storage for it. So we're getting ahead of ourselves, and in the evenings, as my opponent said, you know, renewable energy misses the mark. So we should continue to invest in natural gas and other cleaner alternatives as we begin to scale renewable energy. And we should really invest in renewable energy in a way that allows us to outgenerate, outbuild, and outcompete our global competitors. For example, China and Germany, they are not debating climate change. They are investing in renewable energy and running laps around us. And I don't want us to cede our energy future to China. That's the last thing we need for our economic and national security. Let's beat them for that race for renewable energy, make sure that we restore manufacturing in America, and do it by having, once again, the innovative spirit of our small businesses to come up with innovative ways to not just generate, but store renewable energy here in America.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to an issue that is critically important to business and our membership, and that's healthcare. Amid the pandemic, healthcare costs are an increasing concern for obvious reasons. How can we bring healthcare costs down and improve accessibility? Start with you, Mr. Campa-Najjar.
Yeah, you know, my opponents called me a socialist, and I'm not. But look, I'm mad enough to admit that after the past 4 years of running, my policies have improved by listening to voters, by talking to healthcare professionals about how do we reduce drug costs for seniors, protect pre-existing conditions, provide an option, a suite of options to people who need healthcare but don't want to be dictated by a monopoly, whether it's government or corporations, on what kind of healthcare they should have for them and their family. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm strongly and more aligned with the people in my district on their needs. That's what you do as a candidate and a hopeful congressman. So that's been my approach. It's called Campa-Care. You can go to my website, campacampaign.com, where you're given options for the best healthcare for you and your family. And that's what I would propose. You know, in contrast, my opponent, I don't remember, maybe we'll hear it tonight, but I haven't heard him. He's had 18 years to propose a healthcare plan. I've never heard his plan per se. And the Republican Party has really gotten a lot of flack for not having a plan to replace, but only repeal the current healthcare exchanges that we have. So I'm eager to hear his ideas on that, but I haven't heard it. He's had 18 years to fix it. We're still stuck in the rut, and we don't have better healthcare for people. So, you know, while my opponent's attacking me on my healthcare stances, he's not presenting his own. And it's a little bit disingenuous to say that, you know, I'm a socialist. The honest truth is, you know, when it came to Medicare for all, it was an idea with no plan. After 2019, with the debates, we definitely saw the plans or lack thereof. And since then, I've developed my own plans to reduce cost, create competition, and give people the healthcare that they need and the prescription drug costs at a rate that they could afford. But those are my plans, and I'd like to hear what my opponents are after 18 years of being in Congress and having nothing to show for healthcare reform. Aside from being the deciding vote to take away healthcare from people who have pre-existing conditions in 2016.
Mr. Issa.
You know, it's interesting that my friend has gone from being a socialist and he didn't win the first time to this new position. That's fine. I appreciate the fact that he's running away from all the things that didn't win last time and wanting us to believe, well, he's still endorsed by all the progressives, that in fact he's become a moderate. That's okay. You change your positions in 2 years. That's fine. Let's go through the record.
That's fine.
My position on, I didn't speak when you were speaking. My position over my years has been very consistent. In order to reduce the cost of healthcare, we have to reduce the cost of healthcare, not try to subsidize insurance. The basic goal is competition, tort reform, FDA reform. These are the three things that will work. The FDA cost over $1 billion for each new prescription drug, even if it's on something that's already on the market and you just want to repurpose it. That drives up the actual cost of pharmaceuticals. But pharmaceuticals are only about 20% of the cost of healthcare. A lot of people spend a lot of time on it. I appreciate that. But if you reduce all pharmaceuticals to zero, you'd still have 80% of the cost, and most people can't afford 80% of the cost of healthcare today. So tort reform, so that we stop defensive medicine, so that instead of the lawyers getting the money, the doctor it actually flows to them. It's a serious thing, something that Senator Feinstein and others and I have worked together on micro reform, where we tried to nationalize what is the California tort limit. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than the many states where there's unlimited liability and where the plaintiff's trial lawyers love to pick up a lot of money, but no value to healthcare. Ultimately, what we need to do on healthcare, though, includes competition. During the Obamacare pure party line decision, I introduced and continued to push for FEHBP for all. That's a lot of nice initials, but what it basically says is the largest single healthcare organization there is in fact the federal workers. The millions of federal workers are all covered by, and there's lots of choice, hundreds of different choices, the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan. Instead of going to Obamacare and creating a new bureaucracy, what I proposed was that you could take this pool that already exists, and any business, any small business, any individual would be able to buy into an existing pool and simply join it. By the way, every FEHBP program, Blue Cross and the like, Kaiser, they're all in it. They all already did not have any provisions for pre-existing conditions, meaning there was no penalty for pre-existing conditions. So you already took care of that to begin with. That fell on deaf ears when President Obama had his plan, which was to take a road to single payer. And my opponent, at least in the past, had said he wanted a path to single payer. He was very proud of a backdoor path to single payer and said so. I don't believe in single payer, just the opposite. We've got to increase competition, not reduce competition if we're going to lower prices.
Do I get to respond, or should we just move on, John?
I'll give you both opportunity at the very end to respond, so you can wrap up your thoughts and comments at the end with however you please. So if that's best, we're kind of winding down on time here. I want to take a couple questions from the audience. Please, anybody who's interested in asking a question, type it in the Q&A feature, and Dylan will make sure to share that so we can get it out. But we have received several questions on your experience in business. Can you please talk about your experience in business? How many people did you employ? How many people did you work with? What is your management style? And we'll start with you, Mr. Campa-Najjar.
Yeah, so I started my company, my business in 2016, made some good money in 2016. I've subcontracted a lot of people and signed the front of the check multiple times. I'm proud of that. I have to admit, I did not make, hundreds of millions of dollars like my opponent. Which is not a dig. It's just I don't have that I don't come from that background of being extremely wealthy, but I had a successful business that's kept me afloat. And I'm proud of the work that I've done. I've been an employer with my small business. I've been an employer with my campaign, of course. I've been an employer at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as an executive, where I've employed people when I worked on campaigns. So I have a history of employing people and working on that side, but also the Department of Labor, getting people to retool and retrain, get good paying jobs, and help people who have been laid off because of failed trade agreements with TAA assistance and other things like that. So I'm proud of my record. It's not my fault that I wasn't put on this earth earlier than Darrell Issa. He likes to mention our age difference. There's nothing I could do about my age. It just is what it is. And when Congressman Darrell Issa first got to Congress, he was a young disruptor too. And people said he was inexperienced and everything else, and he proved and defied the odds. So I hope to do what he did 18 years ago and have a record of bipartisanship as well. But in terms of being a small business owner, a job creator, a hirer, I have that experience at the young age of 31 years old. And I've also served in government and also worked as a janitor growing up. So I've kind of circled the globe a little bit in terms of my work experience. And, I don't think being a congressman is a prerequisite to being elected to Congress. That would become a problem very quickly. But I do think that it's important that you have a diverse experience. And, as a Latino Arab American, I would bring a lot of diversity, but also some business acumen and also work experience working with my hands and honest living. So.
Maybe you can talk about your experience as a business owner and how that reflects on your time in Congress.
Well, I too started off with the odd jobs and the small business and the lawnmower, except of course, I also shoveled snow in the winter, something that Ammar didn't get a chance to do.
I did in DC for a bit.
It was very lucrative. But the fact is I learned my business working my way through college. I held down full and part-time jobs throughout my entire time in college. Upon graduation, was commissioned. When I left the military, I went right into business as a manufacturer in Cleveland, Ohio. It was a small and not terribly successful business. I had a partner. We worked hard. We were subcontractors. But as we were doing that, I developed some ideas of products that I could make. When I launched my own company, it took a little while to get going. By 1985, 5 years of being a manufacturer, I was just about to break $1 million. By the time I left, I'd broken 110 million, and the company today is about an $800 million company. But the fact is that all throughout the time of being a small businessman, learning to cut my own wire, make my own molds, run a molding machine, all the other things that it takes when you're a small business. I also had to learn all the problems with the plaintiff's bar and the frivolous lawsuits and all the other things that go on. One thing that I did throughout the entire period of building it was work with the chambers, work with the other groups, find out how other people were working their businesses, learn from my, if you will, people in diverse businesses. I learned about printing not by being a printer, but by knowing printers and hearing what they had to say. One of the things that I am proud of is that I ran a business that always paid its taxes, always took care of its employees. For my entire time building directed electronics, I never laid off one person, and as a result had a company with very good retention, and that was through the time that I sold it and for many years after that. My opponent, and I know that these are always controversial, he talks about a small business. Twice it was suspended and he had to have it reinstated because he didn't pay his taxes. We've looked at his business, and quite frankly, I'm happy to put my taxes out if he'll put his taxes out, because I think you're going to find that he's exaggerated the accuracy of his business, the employment, and so on. And I would hope that he would be more honest that he really was a lobbyist and a consultant and not a particularly good one. Having said that, that's his Washington business. I understand what it's all about. But I wasn't a Washington business. I didn't do government contracting as I built directed electronics. I worked in the electronics industry, competing against the Japanese, the Chinese, and other global companies, and succeeding. And I'm proud of that, but I'm also proud that I never stopped being a small businessman.
Do I get to respond to that?
Let's hold it for the end, but I will give you the opportunity. But I will start with you. We've got another question from the audience. We're running out of time, so I just want to make sure to get to those. The 50th Congressional District, obviously, historically a Republican-held seat. There's been some movement on that. For Campa-Najjar, how are you reaching out to voters that are not part of your party, and really, what's your message to them?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to voters in person, I don't spend my time attacking my opponent. I talk to them about what I believe in. I talk to them about how, look, we don't agree on everything. If you want to agree with somebody 100% of the time, join a cult, not a campaign, right? But on the 70, 80% that we agree on, we'll go far together. What I've heard from people in my district is, we've seen you more than we've seen Congressman Issa in Lakeside and Santee and El Cajon, up in North County, Escondido, Temecula. And their feeling is, look, you're going to go far with us. We have your attention, we have your access, and the things we agree on will go far together. And so that notion that, you know, we might not agree on everything, but we could go far together gets a lot of traction on the ground. And I tell them, I'll always be here. I won't cut and run. I won't leave districts when things get tough. And I'll always have your best interests at heart. And that's really been the way that I've been able to rise above the partisanship and rise above the attacks and, you know, tell people I understand the things that small business owners go through, right? The cumbersome regulations and all the fees that you have to pay to stay a small business. In fact, I support the idea that Mark Cuban has, which is to have the federal government help California and other big expensive states waive those fees that small business have to pay every single year that my opponent's talking about. You know, I've focused on my campaign more than I focused on my business when I've been running, because the constituents are my primary focus, and I've actually made a lot of sacrifices personally. And that's because I put the district and the people above myself and my own enrichment. And that's been a point of contention and contrast with my opponent. But, you know, I want to make it easier for small businesses to flourish. And as a small business owner myself, I know it could be very tough sometimes, especially when you have competing needs, whether it's kids or my child, this campaign that I've raised for 4 years. So, you know, I think it's really important that we reach out to people, and our conversations are really about our records and our vision, and, you know, not denigrating each other. I know that campaigns get muddy, and I'm throwing my mud as well. But when I'm talking to voters one-on-one, it's more about my vision as opposed to my opponents.
Mr. Issa.
You know, it's always interesting when someone says they don't want to throw mud, but you know, my opponent has accused me of the most egregious things. Oddly enough, all of them apparently are from before he was born, but he's still wanting to say that I'm a felon, that I'm a thief, that I'm an arsonist. Those kinds of claims emerged in 1998, in 2000, and again in 2016. They don't pass the smell test. What does pass the smell test is 18 years of being a successful congressman, flying back here never less than 40 times in a single year, never less than 40 times. Well, in fact, also doing my job on the Foreign Affairs Committee and my job as chairman of oversight. I was able to do all of that while still coming back to my district. Now, I haven't seen Ammar in North County. I haven't seen him in Temecula. I get to East County about a third of the time. I'm in the other two about 2/3 of the time. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not visiting with constituents. And quite frankly, what they want to know is, who is the real Ammar? They want to know why somebody who was clearly a progressive, who was for the Green New Deal, who was for single payer, is now saying he's a moderate. And the answer is he couldn't win as who he was. So now he's going to tell us all that he's practically Darrell Issa, but with a D after his name. I have a record, I'm willing to run on my record of actual legislation that I've offered and had passed, or legislation I offered and didn't have passed. Like the H-1B that Scott Peters and I put up together and almost got through the House. It passed out of committee. Those kinds of things are part of my record of accomplishment. I care about my community. I care about my district. I've given away my salary, which I'm not asking other people to do, but I've given away my salary, never taken a penny from my campaign fundraising, actually given to my campaign many, many times. Because I could afford to, but also because I'm not in it for the money. This is public service. This is what I've dedicated my adult life to. I did it before I went to government in a paid position in a number of areas, and I've done it by giving up my pay and working for my constituents. One thing I do want to close, if this is somewhat of a close, is anyone who looks at the lines of the 50th Congressional District will see that Ammar wasn't born in the district. He didn't live in the district regularly until he was getting ready to come back and run. And that's okay, because the fact is, the Constitution and the constituents want you to be invested in the community, not necessarily live in a particular part of it. It's not my fault that he lives in Hamul or that I live in Bonsall. What is important is I'm invested in this community. I've worked in this community. I've worked for this community. And people at the far stretches, not just in the 50th, but throughout Southern California, know if there's something going on, I'm there and I'm involved in it. And I make sure that the federal government works for them. and particularly for our men and women in uniform and those who have served and the veterans. The Veterans Choice Act and other things that I was deeply involved in and will continue to be involved in if I'm honored to be returned to Congress.
Both. I think we're kind of winding down on time, and I do want to provide you both with ample opportunity to address some of the points that were raised tonight. And Ammar, we'll start with you if that's okay, but if we can keep your comments brief to, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, we'll get everyone out of here at 7:15 schedules. We'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you all for being here. I do think this generated more light than heat compared to previous debates, and I'm happy about that. Thank you guys for keeping us honest and keeping us straight. My opponent likes to say I wasn't born in the district. I was born in East County, and he was born in Cleveland. You tell me who has closer roots to their birth. I'll let you be the decider of that. My opponent likes to say that he lives in the district. He said to the Tribune that he doesn't live in Bonsall right now for understandable reasons, or in Vista. So, he has many homes. Maybe it's in Oceanside. I'm not sure, but I live in the district, I'm from the district, and I will always commit to being in the district. The notion that Darrell Issa is not a flip-flopper is laughable on its face, and it's because the thing that he really flip-flopped on the most that everyone here knows is he said in 2018 it was time for him to retire. He should have been gone 2, 3, 4 years before his retirement. He said he wanted to enjoy his retirement, that he was done with Congress. And where is he now? He's running for Congress. So on the notion that it's time for him to move on, he has flip-flopped on that. So start there and work your way back. And everything he said about his past that has been debunked, it's public record. He wrote it in his memoir. Whether you think you want to hold that against him or not is up to you, the voter. But he cannot gaslight us and change the past. And frankly, I think this is about the future. And I think the future is in the present moment. You have somebody right now who's worked in this campaign for 4 years. Darrell Issa's had 18 years. That's plenty of time. He's done some good. He's done some things that I don't agree with, but it's time to give the new generation a chance. And I'm not the boogeyman. I'm not that bad. So give me a shot to be your congressman. If you don't like me, you could cast me out in 2 years. My opponent refuses to acknowledge that he's changed on positions. He thinks that changing and evolving is a bad thing. And I don't know if that's a generational difference, but I actually think it's a healthy thing to grow and evolve and become more aligned with your constituents, to be a better representative. Every year there's room for growth. None of us come, to this world perfect. It's good to grow. It's good to improve. And the fact that he's so inflexible and saying these are my rigid positions and I've never changed, which is not true on its face. The mere fact he's running is evidence that he changes his positions like he changes districts, by the way. But it's important that we have people who grow more aligned with their district all the time. And that's what I've been able to do. I hope to have people support. I know Darrell Issa has a lot of friends at the chamber, and he's from North County, whether it's in the district or out the district or whatever, but I hope you'll give me a shot. And, I hope when I win, I could count on Congressman Darrell Issa's advice and counsel, his sagely, statesmanly advice. I know it's going to be a dirty campaign, but I think both of us are pretty tough. We've been called everything under the sun before as Arab Americans. And I hope I could lean on him once this race is over, but I know it's going to be tough the next 29 days. But this notion that he's not a flip-flopper is disproven by the fact that he's running for Congress again. Let's be very straight about that. So thank you for your time, and I hope you'll give an East County son a chance to represent North County and Temecula too.
Well, thanks again for giving us this opportunity. Since most of the time in the close was spent on this question of my leaving, after I endorsed President Trump and campaigned for him all the way through the race, I was invited back to Trump Towers during the transition. I met with the president. He told me he wanted me in his administration. I made a decision with Reince Priebus that it would be better to leave my district in the ordinary course rather than a special election, because it was, in fact, a strong Democrat leading district. And if we had a chance to hold it, it would be best that somebody have a full time. So I gave notice that I was leaving, but I didn't give notice I was leaving because I was tired or I needed to retire. I was excited about helping in the developing world, helping in the Trump administration, and I left for that purpose. And I sat and I walked the halls of the Senate, and I waited for partisan behavior of one senator to stop, and it never stopped. Ultimately, when it became obvious that Duncan Hunter was leaving, knowing that this was more my district than actually the 49th in 2012, that more of this, what is now the 50th, I had served for 12 years. I knew the district. I also felt very strongly that I wanted to continue public service. I loved the Congress, and it seemed like destiny, fate, whatever, had said I wasn't going to serve in the administration. So I decided to do that. I could have taken a non-confirmed position in the administration, but I chose to come back and serve the people of Southern California, of the 50th Congressional District. Ammar, rightfully so, said, I'm not living at my house in Bonsall right now. No, my mom is 88. She's a cancer survivor. And it was pretty important that we create a safe cocoon for her. So I packed up my bags and I'm temporarily living in Oceanside. But the fact is, I'm still a registered voter in Bonsall. I still own the home, and I still am very committed to the 50th Congressional District. Actually, I made an offer on a home that had a guest house that was big enough for my mom, and I'd hoped to move. But in this pandemic, the bidding got a little tough, and I didn't get that house. But the reality is, I'm going to stay invested in the 50th Congressional District, and I'm going to stay invested in California. Ammar was actually right. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, one of 6 kids to a family where my father worked 2 jobs until it literally killed him at a young age. But the fact is that I came out here in the military. I fell in love with California. This is where I want to be. And the first chance I got to begin building a business in California, I took. And I've been here since 1985, deeply committed to my state. Frustrated that my state sometimes drives people away, but they're not driving me away. This is a place that I love, that I built my business, raised my family. My granddaughters live here. My mom, God willing, will live here for a long time, and I will live here the rest of my life. So I look forward to Ammar helping me. My Arabic isn't nearly as good as his. He certainly is able to get in and out of the mosque where I am having a harder time. There's a lot of outreach that I think he can do after I'm elected. So I thank you for hosting this, and I thank you for supporting a lively debate.
What a dog whistle, Jesus. Okay.
Thank you both very much. We sincerely appreciate your time and coming here to talk about so many important issues that are critically important to the 50th and to the San Diego North Regional Chamber of Commerce. Especially want to thank all of the members of the San Diego North Regional Chamber of Commerce who participated tonight. We have a little stiff competition with a certain playoff game that's taking place right now. Hopefully it's going well. I'm sure we'll all want to check the score here soon. But again, sincerely, we appreciate your time and wish you both the best.
Thank you. And if we want to go to church together, Darrell, with the St. Peter's with the Chaldeans, they speak Arabic too. We could go there anytime.
I was there last Sunday. Thank you.
I was there too. I spoke better Arabic though. Anyways.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck going forward. And again, for those in attendance, we will be sharing a recording in the future. So be on the look for that coming in your inbox soon. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.